The kingdom of Solaria was a land of perpetual winter, not because of the climate, but because of the man who wore the Iron Crown. King Kalen was known across the continents as the Blood Monarch. He was a tyrant whose heart was as cold and sharp as the glaciers that ringed his dark fortress. Under his rule, the people of Solaria knew only hunger, fear, and the heavy toll of taxes that kept them in a state of endless poverty. King Kalen did not tolerate weakness, nor did he allow joy. Festivals were banned, laughter in public was punished by imprisonment, and any sign of rebellion was met with immediate, public execution. He ruled from a high throne made of melted swords, looking down on his subjects as mere insects born to serve his grand ambitions. In the valley beneath the fortress, far from the luxury of the court, lived a young woman named Elena. She was a widow who worked the barren fields from dawn until dusk. Her only solace, her entire world, was her 7-year-old son, Julian. Julian was a child of unbelievable beauty. He did not look like the hungry, hollow-cheeked children of the valley. His skin was smooth and radiant, like polished ivory, and his eyes were a deep, mesmerizing violet that seemed to hold the warmth of 1,000 suns. His hair fell in soft, golden curls around a face so perfectly formed that even the most hardened laborers would stop and smile just looking at him. But Julian's true beauty was not his face, it was his heart. In a kingdom choked by cruelty, Julian was pure kindness. He would share his tiny crust of bread with stray animals and sing sweet, soft melodies to comfort his exhausted mother. Greater than, do not let the guards see you smiling, my love, Elena would often whisper, wrapping a ragged scarf around his golden hair. The king hates anything that shines in this dark place. Greater than, but beauty and light are impossible to hide in a world of absolute darkness. The winter of the 7th year of Kalen's reign was the harshest the kingdom had ever seen. The crops failed entirely, and the people began to starve. Desperate, a small group of village elders traveled to the gates of the fortress to beg for a reduction in the grain tax, just enough to keep their children alive through the frost. King Kalen's response was swift and merciless. He ordered his royal hussars to ride into the villages and seize double the amount of grain as punishment for their insolence. The soldiers stormed the valley like a plague of locusts. They kicked open doors, dragged families into the snow, and emptied the remaining granaries. When they reached Elena's small stone cottage, the commander, a brutal man named Captain Vane, ordered his men to take the last sack of oats Elena had hidden beneath the floorboards. "Please, sir," Elena begged, throwing herself at the commander's boots. "If you take this, my son will not survive the month." "Have mercy," Captain Vane laughed, raising his heavy leather whip to strike her down. "Stop," a small but incredibly clear voice echoed through the chaotic courtyard. Julian stepped out from behind the cottage door. He had dropped his scarf, and his golden curls caught the pale winter light. His violet eyes locked onto the commander with an intensity that made the soldier freeze. The courtyard fell silent. The soldiers stared at the boy, mesmerized by his angelic visage. For a moment, the cruelty in Captain Vane's eyes flickered, replaced by pure astonishment. A child of such breathtaking grace did not belong in a miserable peasant village. "Bring the boy," Vane ordered, his voice suddenly quiet. "The king seeks rare treasures for his court. A creature this beautiful will surely fetch a high price from the monarch." Elena screamed and fought, but she was pinned to the frozen ground by 2 guards. Julian did not cry out. He looked back at his mother with tears in his violet eyes, his voice steady. "Be brave, mother. The light will return." Julian was brought into the grand hall of Castle Solaria. The hall was a terrifying place of black marble and sharp iron spikes, filled with silent, terrified nobles. On the throne sat King Kalen, his dark eyes bored and full of contempt as Captain Vane knelt before him. "Your Majesty," Vane announced, "we found this child in the lower valley. I believed his unusual appearance might amuse your court." Kalen leaned forward, his gaze landing on the small boy standing in the center of the vast hall. The king's expression did not change, but his eyes narrowed. He had spent his life surrounded by gold, jewels, and fine art, but he had never seen a living being so perfectly beautiful. Julian stood before the tyrant without trembling, his violet eyes looking directly into the king's dark soul. "He is a peasant," Kalen said coldly. "Beauty is useless if it cannot wield a sword or pay taxes. Why should I keep him alive?" "Because, your Majesty," Julian spoke up, his voice echoing beautifully through the stone hall, "a king who only surrounds himself with iron and blood will eventually forget what he is protecting." The nobles gasped. Speaking to the king without permission meant death. Kalen's grip tightened on his throne. He stood up, his heavy black cloak flowing behind him, and walked down the steps until he stood right above the child. You have a sharp tongue for a creature so fragile, Kalen whispered, lifting Julian's chin with his cold, armored finger. I will not kill you. Instead, I will keep you here as a pet. You will see how your light fades inside these black walls. Let us see how long your beauty lasts when you are a prisoner of the Iron Crown. Julian was given a small room in the highest tower. He was dressed in fine silk and given rich food, but he was a prisoner nonetheless. He was forced to stand beside the king's throne during audiences, a beautiful ornament meant to contrast with Kalen's terrifying presence. Yet, Julian did not wither. He watched the king's cruelty every day, but instead of learning fear, he learned the geography of the tyrant's madness. Months passed. The starvation in the kingdom turned into a quiet, burning fury. The people had reached their limit. In the shadows of the valley, led by Elena and a few surviving soldiers who had deserted the king's army, a secret rebellion was born. They began to forge weapons from farm tools and organize secret meetings in the deep caves. Inside the castle, Julian became the rebellion's secret ally. Because the guards viewed him merely as a beautiful child, they spoke freely around him. Julian listened to the guard rotations, the weaknesses in the castle walls, and the deployment of the king's armies. Every night, Julian would look out of his high tower window. He discovered that a young kitchen servant named Tomas was part of the underground movement. When Tomas brought Julian his evening meals, Julian would slip small, beautifully written notes into the empty bowls, notes detailing the castle's defenses, the secret tunnels beneath the moat, and the nights when the king's personal guard would be diminished. Julian's beauty became his armor. Whenever King Kalen looked at the boy, he saw only a harmless, silent child. He did not realize that those deep violet eyes were calculating his downfall. One evening, Kalen noticed Julian looking out at the snow-covered kingdom. What do you look for, boy? The king demanded. There is nothing out there but misery. I am looking at the dawn, your majesty, Julian replied softly, turning to face him. The night is always darkest just before the sun rises. Kalen scoffed, drinking his dark wine. The sun rises only when I allow it. The night arrived. It was the anniversary of the Crimson Decree, the exact day Julian had been taken. A massive blizzard swept across Solaria, masking the sounds of thousands of peasants marching up the mountain, carrying torches and weapons forged from their shared agony. Thanks to Julian's precise notes, the rebel army knew exactly which gate to target. They bypassed the heavily guarded front bastions and poured through the old sewage tunnels, opening the secondary iron gates from the inside. Alarm bells broke the silence of the night. The castle erupted into a war zone. King Kalen, furious and shocked by the sudden breach, drew his massive greatsword and rallied his elite guard in the grand hall. Cut them down, leave no one alive, he roared. As the battle raged in the lower courtyards, Julian slipped out of his tower room. He didn't run away, he went down into the heart of the castle to help the servants and prisoners escape from the dungeons. His golden hair and glowing presence guided the terrified captives through the smoke-filled corridors like a living beacon. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the grand hall burst open. The rebels, led by Elena, flooded the room. The king's elite guards were outnumbered and exhausted, their discipline breaking under the sheer, desperate fury of the people. Kalen fought like a demon, his sword covered in the blood of his subjects. He managed to push the rebel front back, his eyes wild with rage. I am the crown, you are nothing without me. At that moment, Julian entered the hall, standing between the rebel forces and the bleeding tyrant. Kalen looked at Julian, his breath ragged, his armor cracked. You brought them here, the king realized, his voice trembling with a mixture of betrayal and fury. I gave you luxury, I spared your life. You gave me a cage, Kalen, Julian said, walking forward calmly as the fighting around them slowly stopped. And you gave your people graves. Luxury means nothing when it is bought with the blood of the innocent. Kalen roared, raising his sword to strike the beautiful child down. But the rebels did not let him move. A dozen spears pierced the tyrant's armor, and with a final, choked gasp, the Sangdil king fell to his knees, his sword clattering to the black marble floor before he collapsed entirely. The hall became completely silent. The tyrant was dead, but the kingdom was broken. The rebels looked around at the ruin, uncertain of what would come next. Elena ran forward, throwing her arms around Julian, weeping tears of joy. My beautiful boy, you saved us. The rebel commanders stepped forward, looking at the child who had provided the intelligence to win the war. They saw his flawless face, his untainted spirit, and the wisdom in his violet eyes. One by one, the battle-hardened soldiers and the weary peasants dropped to their knees before him. We need a ruler who knows the value of life, the lead commander declared. We need a king who rules with light, not iron. Julian looked at the crown of Kaelin lying in the pool of blood. He walked over, picked it up, and handed it to the blacksmiths. Melt it down, Julian ordered softly. Make tools for the farmers, toys for the children, and building blocks for our homes. We will not have a king. We will have a council of the people, where every voice is heard, and where beauty is found in our kindness to one another. From that day on, the kingdom of Solaria was never cold again. The winter remained, but the hearts of the people were warm, led by the memory of the beautiful child who brought down a tyrant without ever drawing a sword.